How are we doing, everybody, and welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we're concluding the backswing. If you're new to the channel, then basically what I've been doing recently is breaking every part of the golf swing down, and I'm basically helping you self-diagnose what it is that you should be looking for in your golf swing and potentially when it's going wrong. The thing with the golf swing is that it's probably about 4 or 5 things that you have to do, which are things that I'm talking about. The rest of it are characteristics of things like how we biomechanically are made up. And I think sometimes we get the misconception about things like how the golf swing should look, and then it starts to cause inconsistency. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the variances of the backswing at the top. So things that you should be looking for, but also things that can look different depending on your range of motion. Time to get stuck into this then. So where we kind of concluded was left arm horizontal. So we talked very much about this position here. Talked about the importance of creating a resistance in the trail side, so keeping the leg flexed but also trying to limit the amount of upper rotation on the upper part of the leg. Creates a load, creates a resistance. What you're going to do as you complete the top of your backswing is that your body's going to continue to keep rotating, right? So that's absolutely fine, but you've still got to keep this level of resistance up. Now the upper part of the leg will rotate. So if I kind of demonstrate my left arm horizontal position as opposed to the top of my backswing, as the pelvis continues to move, there will be a degree of upper leg rotation here. But the feeling is that I'm still trying to create an element of resistance. And it's very much similar to when I did that great exercise of using a wedge. When we used the wedge, we basically isolated the movement in this leg, so it forced you to turn the pelvis into it. That is exactly the feeling you need to maintain in your backswing position. Now, professionals are slightly different. We'll see golfers that will swing back and the right leg stays incredibly flexed. Somebody like Brooks Koepka comes to mind, and there's also good examples of golfers like Dustin Johnson comes to mind, who will create more of a rotation of the pelvis and therefore the leg will straighten. My advice to most amateur golfers is that, generally speaking, from what I see from golfers who send the swings into the channel and people who visit for lessons, suffer in the backswing, and they suffer with the concept of load. And normally this is because you just go for liberty and you just try and turn as much as you can. I would kind of really focus, similar to that wedge exercise, restrict the amount of rotation in the upper part of the leg, create that resistance first and foremost, make sure you maintain that feeling at the top of your backswing. But all that will slightly change from the left arm horizontal position is as you continue to turn your body, the weight will potentially now start to move between the outside of the part of the right foot and potentially into the heel, because you're increasing the amount of rotation in the pelvis. Keep the resistance, but the first thing to understand is that yes, the weight now will start to move more in towards the heel potentially. Okay, so the next question would be, what happens with the upper body as we conclude the top of the backswing position? Well, some of this you won't necessarily get the choice about. Now, basically, the first thing to understand is that understanding the concept of swinging the club on plane. So you can see I've rested this kind of 3-dimensional plane angle here on the ground, and it represents the angle of the shaft of the golf club as to which I'm holding. And again, I think most golfers understand the concept of plane, of working the shaft basically perpendicular to your spine angle. Now that's fine and potentially the optimum angle that you want to swing on, but what I'm also trying to educate people, and this surprises a lot of people that come to visit for lessons, is that you can still hit the ball straight from a more vertical plane. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in terms of how you'd balance this up in the downswing as this series progresses. But basically what would need to happen for you to be able to keep the club on plane is that as you get to this left arm horizontal position, and as you want to conclude the top of the backswing, yes, your upper body will continue to rotate. But basically what needs to happen is that you would need to create an element of external rotation in terms of this way to keep the palm upward facing, which would basically give you the ability to kind of end up looking this way. Now the problem is that if you kind of do this exercise at home and you realise that without compensating by going this way, and you can't isolate the amount of upper arm rotation into your ball and socket joint, then all of a sudden you're limited in terms of how on plane you can look in a traditional sense. And this is amazing how many people I meet that hit it instantaneously better, but just by dismissing the idea that you think you need to swing along this sort of line. So for example, if you can't create a degree of external rotation, then basically you'd understand that your forearm would be vertical towards your spine angle. Therefore, if you take your posture, you're going to look this way. Now the thing that stops the club looking entirely this way is the hinge on the back of the trail wrist. But basically your forearm is never going to be able to go more vertical unless you have the ability to externally rotate. Therefore the shaft is always going to appear to be on a more vertical plane. But again, it does not matter. And as we talk about the downswing, I'll start to kind of shed more and more light on this. You can still hit straight and great golf shots, even if the shaft is more vertical, even if it kind of goes across the line. It doesn't matter. The concept of not having a flying elbow, yeah, fine. There's great examples of golfers out there who do have a flying elbow. And obviously there's a large proportion of professionals that don't. But you've got to remember, the reason why you want to tuck the elbow in is potentially, yes, to stay closer towards this plane line. What I'm also saying is, to be able to do that, you'd need to have an element of external rotation similar to what I'm showing you here, which basically means now, if I now rest this down so it represents more my target line, so I'm aiming in the opposite sort of direction, then if I kind of imagined I just take the club straight up, well, the reason why my golf swing doesn't look that way would mainly be due to the amount of external shoulder rotation that I can do in terms of this movement. Now, like I say, if a golfer can't demonstrate that motion, then unfortunately, yes, you are going to look more vertical, but it will liberate you. It will stop you from trying to fight things you can't do. And the question would be, if you can't create an external shoulder rotation in terms of this motion here, and you're still trying to get on plane or trying to get the shaft parallel to the original plane line, the question is, how are you going to do it? And the answer is by drifting forward, exactly the same as you would if you did this motion and you can't do it, and you'll be like, you're trying to find a way to do it, and all you're doing is kind of extending your back so it looks like the arm's going this way. And then all of a sudden the shaft starts to look more on plane. But your biggest thing about the golf swing, and in my opinion, the thing that you have to control the most, is going to be the pivot of your rotation, which is going to come from your pelvis rotation. So what I'm saying is that plane is a slight misconception. You are basically on plane as long as the shaft is pointing down towards your ball to target line, whether you're here or here. The thing that helps you look more this way, and what we see on the TV, is because of the amount of external rotation on this arm. If you can't do it, you have to become more acceptant to the idea that the shaft's going to look more vertical, your elbow's going to look like it pops up more, but it doesn't mean you're going to come over the top, and it doesn't mean you have to hit slices, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about the transition and the downswing in more detail. Okay, so once you become acceptant to the idea that you can't create such a huge range of motion in terms of this way, and you maybe have to operate in a more vertical plane, then basically what then do you need to do in the backswing? We've already talked about the lower body, we've talked about the resistance, we know the weight should go in towards the heel on the outside part of the foot. If you move correctly through the takeaway to the left arm horizontal up towards the backswing position, you'll still be nice and centered. We also know now that basically if you've been struggling with the top of your backswing position, then you don't want to compensate by drifting this way, and you want to make sure that you understand that the shaft can look more vertical, and it will help you create a larger range of motion. What you do want to do in your backswing position, in my opinion, right? Coordinated golfers, and I mean incredibly coordinated golfers, can get away with having a slight bend in the arm. But for the majority of golfers who don't practice in an abundance and maybe don't have such a huge amount of coordination, my suggestion would be to always try and keep this arm straight. Now, I've talked about it before, and I'll mention it again. When you swing back, you basically need to feel like you're pushing the club away to be able to keep your lead arm straight. Now, depending on your range of motion, whether you can do the external rotation or whether you can't, would then change from a face-on perspective the appearance as to how close this elbow would be to the side of you. See, I see quite a lot of videos that have been suggested from people that drop comments in and suggestions, what did you think of this or what do you think of that? And sometimes you get these sort of training aids or devices where it's like, keep your arms tucked in, but the problem is it just won't work for the generic amount of people. You know, for myself, somebody who can create the external rotation, you can see the way my elbow can stay in a more vertical place, which means my elbow is very close towards the side of my rib cage. But for somebody who can't demonstrate that motion, all of a sudden then you can't keep the arm straight without compensating. So my point is that this arm is going to be the arm that is basically going to help you lift the club up. And I've got some good exercises to help you get a good feeling for your backswing position. But what I'm saying is that you have to find a way to keep this arm straight, and that's what this arm's going to do. So if we went back to our example of somebody who has no external rotation, you're going to look potentially more this way, which means from a face-on perspective, your elbow is going to look further away from you. It doesn't stop you on the way down bringing your elbow to the side of you, but on the way back it hinders your ability to keep the left arm straight. Last thing to talk about then is going to be about the functionalities, the things that I've talked about before, as to the feelings from things like activating things like your obliques in your golf swing to help you turn on a tilted axis. So these kind of movements are known as a side bend, and then from a face-on perspective, we're going to talk a little bit about an extension of the spine as well. Now, these aren't necessarily necessities maybe for every golfer, but they're things that I think offer you a good sense of feeling. Now again, what can happen in the golf swing, and the most common problem, is that the pelvis starts to drift forward. See it all of the time, right? See it all of the time with amateur golfers that make this sort of mistake. And I think the reason why is all already alluded to is the misconceptions of the backswing. A great feeling to have in the backswing position is to get the sense that when you swing back, you're going to kind of feel an activation down this side of your body. So as you can see from a face-on perspective, it almost feels like I'm kind of rising this shoulder up whilst trying to keep my head still, and it really kind of lifts the rib cage up. And then I start to get a feeling of activation up here, and what that'll do is that'll help me, give me a feeling of kind of lifting the club up a little bit more. But it's a good activation to have as well, because it will help you stay maybe potentially more in posture, as opposed to if I kind of reduce this, then you can see the way the pelvis then starts to drift. It's a good feeling. So that would be one of the components, right? Potentially introducing a side bend and getting a feeling around the rib cage and the obliques would be a good thing to have, to make sure that you know that you feel like you're staying centered and in posture. But possibly not a necessity for every golfer. It will work for some, it won't work for others. From a face-on perspective, when we swing back, you know, if I kind of just turn my body around, I can end up like this. If I introduce more of a thoracic extension, I stay more centered. And a thoracic extension is quite, in essence, just this sort of motion here. Again, these are things that you can potentially introduce. Everybody's slightly different. The things that I've talked about so far in terms of the resistance is a must. In terms of the external rotation, if you can't create it, is something you have to understand and abide to. Things like the kind of, if we say the side bendy movement and the thoracic extension, are things that you can try and introduce. They're things that you probably might give you a stronger feeling of being more powerful in your backswing. They're things that I experiment with on lessons for people if I feel like they're struggling to stay in posture, and the things that you can experiment with as well. I've got a great drill coming up. Just a very simple exercise, something you can do at home or down the driving range, coming up on the channel next. And it basically is going to give you those sort of feelings again. That's it for today, right? That's the backswing concluded. Moving forward now, we're going to carry on, start working about the transition and coming down. You need to make sure, in my opinion, and again I'm going to conclude on this when our time is done, that I think if you're looking to make a swing change, you have to get into the habit of videoing your own swing. It's the best chance you've got of aligning that perception and reality. But at least what today does again is it probably gets rid of some of those misconceptions about the golf swing. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Always appreciate a thumbs up, and remember, it's absolutely free to press that subscribe button. If you press the subscribe button, next to it is a bell icon. You might as well press that, because that means you'll receive notifications every time a new video comes out. It's absolutely free to send swings into the channel, right? In the description box below is where you'll see my social media links. That's where you can send swings in. I'll annotate over them. I republish them as soon as I possibly can, just to make sure that you guys are on the right sort of track. Catch up with you again soon.